Pope Leo XIV has done what many Catholics thought would never happen. He has publicly corrected two of the most painful and divisive wounds of the last pontificate. These are not small matters. These are questions that for years tore apart parishes, confused priests, and scandalized the faithful all around the world. The first touches the infamous Pachamama scandal. The second touches the deepest truth of all, the reality of hell and salvation for years. Both of these issues became symbols of uncertainty. Under Pope Francis, for some, they were signs that the Church had lost its clarity. For others, they were reminders that confusion had taken the place of truth. But now, Pope Leo XIV has broken the silence, and with firm words, he has returned Christ to the very center. To understand how powerful these corrections are, we must return to 2019. It was October 4th, the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. In the Vatican gardens, a ceremony was held. Wooden statues appeared carved in the form of a pregnant woman with indigenous features. The media quickly explained that these figures represented life, fertility, and the culture of the Amazonian peoples. But to millions of Catholics watching, this was no simple cultural symbol. They saw something far darker. They saw Pachamama, the ancient Indian earth goddess, being honored in the very heart of the Vatican. The images spread everywhere, people bowing, chanting, and singing before these figures. Too many Catholics who cling to the first commandment, "You shall not have other gods before me." This was nothing short of idolatry, carried out on sacred ground. The outrage was immediate. Theologians tried to calm the storm, insisting it was only enculturation, a gesture of respect for indigenous culture. But to countless Catholics, these explanations felt hollow. The sight of people bowing in prayer before a pagan symbol could not be explained away. And then came one bold act. A young Austrian, Alexander Chugel, entered a Roman church where the Pachamama statues were displayed. He took them, carried them out, and threw them into the Tiber River. His action made headlines across the globe. For some, he was a hero of the faith. For others, reckless. But one thing was certain, the scandal was no longer hidden. Days later, Pope Francis himself addressed it. But instead of clarifying the truth, he apologized not to Catholics scandalized by idolatry, but to those offended by the statue's removal. He insisted the figures were symbols of life, yet he never explained what they truly represented. The wound remained wide open. From that day, Pachamama became a word of division in the Church. For years, Rome remained silent. The faithful remained confused. And then, on August 19, 2025, Pope Leo XIV finally acted. Through Cardinal Parolin, he sent a telegram to the bishops of the Amazon. His words were brief, but they cut through years of ambiguity. Nature is a gift, but it is not a goddess. It must never be worshipped. True enculturation does not adopt pagan symbols, it purifies them in the light of the gospel. And no idol has any place in the liturgy. Christ alone is at the center. With those words, clarity returned. Without naming Pachamama directly, the Pope made it clear the era of earth worship in the Church was over. Creation is sacred, but only God is adored. Observers quickly realized Leo XIV's wisdom by not reopening old wounds, but by laying down an eternal principle. He closed the door on all future confusion. But this was only the first correction. Days earlier, at the August 13th General Audience, Leo XIV had already addressed another wound, the question of hell. For years, Catholics were unsettled by certain gestures and comments from Pope Francis that seemed to suggest the possibility that hell might be empty, that perhaps, in the end, all would be saved. On his desk even stood a statue of Christ carrying Judas on his shoulders, like a shepherd who rescues every soul. Many wondered, was this a message? Could Judas himself have been saved? Was hell real? Or was it only a threat without consequence? The debates were endless. Some theologians embraced the idea of universal salvation, saying God's mercy must reach all. Others warned this denied the very words of Christ and the freedom of man. Meanwhile, the faithful were left in doubt. Was eternal damnation real or just a symbol? Pope Leo XIV ended the debate. Without mentioning Francis, he spoke directly. Judas, he said, betrayed Christ and refused the mercy offered to him by his despair. Judas excluded himself from salvation. The message was unmistakable. Hell is not empty. God's mercy is infinite, but it is not forced. It must be freely accepted. Peter denied Christ and repented. Judas betrayed him and refused mercy. The difference was not God's love, which never ends, but man's response. which can reject it forever. These words shattered the dream of universal salvation. The Pope reminded the Church of a truth as old as the gospel. Salvation is a gift, but it is not automatic. Heaven is offered, but hell is real. To deny that reality is to deny human freedom and the seriousness of sin. And so, in just the decisive moments, Pope Leo XIV has redrawn the map. With Pachamama, he closed the door to idolatry disguised as culture. With Judas and hell, he closed the door to universalism disguised as mercy. In both cases, he restored the clarity of tradition without harshness, without attack, but with firm truth. For millions of Catholics, this is a moment of hope. After years of silence and confusion, the Church is once again speaking with a clear voice. The focus is no longer on idols, nor on fashionable theories, but on Christ present in the Eucharist, offering mercy, demanding conversion. The wounds of the past are deep. Healing will take time, but with these two acts, Pope Leo XIV has already begun a new chapter. Rome is no longer silent. The Church is speaking again. The question now is simple. Will the world listen? But let us pause for a moment and understand the weight of what has just happened. These are not merely corrections of two theological debates. These are signals, loud and clear, that the direction of the Church is shifting. For years, Catholics have begged for clarity. For years, they have asked, where is Rome's voice? Where is the shepherd's guidance? And for years, the answer seemed wrapped in silence, ambiguity, and compromise. Now, with Pope Leo XIV, the silence has been shattered, and this is why so many are calling it the beginning of a new chapter. Think about the timing. In a modern world, faith is under siege from all directions. Secular ideologies reduce religion to folklore. Powerful voices mock the Church as outdated, irrelevant, and weak. Young people drift away because they feel the Church no longer speaks clearly. And in the middle of this storm, Pope Leo has chosen not diplomacy, not vagueness, but clarity. His words about idolatry may seem simple. No idol has a place in the liturgy. Christ alone is adored. Yet those words are thunder. They cut through years of confusion. They remind the faithful of what the martyrs of the early Church already knew, that even in Rome itself, it is better to die than to bow before a false god. And then there is a statement on hell. For modern ears, this is uncomfortable. To say that Judas was lost, to affirm that hell is real, this is not a message the world wants to hear. But precisely because it is hard, it is necessary. A faith that refuses to speak of judgment, of eternity, of heaven and hell, is no longer the faith of the gospel, and Pope Leo has reminded us of that. These two corrections are like the striking of a bell in the middle of the night. They wake up the sleepers. They remind us that truth has not disappeared. But here's the question. What happens next for the faithful in the pews? These words bring hope, but also responsibility. It is no longer enough to blame Rome for silence. The clarity has been given. The truth is once again proclaimed. Will Catholics live it? Will priests preach it? Will bishops have the courage to follow where the Pope has pointed? And for those who resist, for those who still cling to ambiguity, these corrections are a challenge. The time for confusion is over. The voice of Peter has spoken. Observers in Rome are already calling this a turning point. Some compare it to past moments when the papacy had to step in and restore order after times of crisis. Others see it as the beginning of a much larger shift away from the blurred lines of the last decade, back to a church rooted in its own tradition, and yet, the road ahead will not be easy. The wounds of the past run deep. Pachamama may no longer appear in the gardens of the Vatican, but the divisions it caused are still alive in parishes, in universities, in dioceses around the world. Likewise, the question of hell is not